does stuff. He did Cloud for Ergi's God Bless the Ring. Um, what's the word? Kuwabara's was done by Shigeru Chiba, who did Raditz in Dragon Ball Z and also in Kai, as well as Garlic Jr. Hiei is voiced by Nobuyuki Hiyama, who most of us know as Vague, but he also did Siegfried, and he also does Raziel in the Japanese version of Legacy of Kain, Soul Reaver. But yeah. And also, while we're on the subject, Keiko was voiced by Laura Bailey, who I believe this was her first, like, role that we really get to know her as, like, that kind of voice that she does. With Kid Trunks, she kind of did a different kind of voice, and she did a great job, and, you know. And with Keiko, she did, you know, an even better job than, you know, I don't know. She was doing a girl voice for once, and, you know. I also, while we're on the subject of Keiko, I also like the way Keiko dressed. She wore, like, you know, like, I felt like I designed her, now that I think about it, because, you know, with my certain with my certain female characters, I dress them sort of schoolgirlish. For the most part, I just make them, you know, wear whatever they want. In terms of like, the other characters, but, you know, Keiko, I like the way she dressed, you know. It was nice. Yusuke had a good catch. Anywho, Genkai, she was voiced by Linda Young, who used to do Frieza. Now it's Greg Ayers, but she did a great job as Genkai. And I didn't know it for the longest time. I finally heard her say, it's like, wait a second, that's Frieza. And she does a great job in as young Genkai. I really think Linda Young would be perfect for Soso if they ever dub Koihime Muzo. And she doesn't work for Funimation anymore, I don't think, or I don't know. I'll have to look her up and see what she's doing lately. But I think she would be perfect for Soso. That young Genkai voice, it's perfect for Soso. Like Soso's Japanese voice actor sounds just like Linda Young. Oh my gosh. She has that weird grandma-ish voice. It's perfect. It's so perfect. It's so perfect. Perfect, perfect, perfect. Everyone else did a good job too. Like, I believe the guy, I can't remember his name, the guy with the scar who was like, Hakusho or something. The guy who was sort of working with Tagora, he was voiced by Eric Vale, who did Trunks, which is pretty impressive. You can barely tell. And here's another thing. The younger Tagoro was voiced by Damian Clark, who did Cell, who did a great job. You know, it's so funny, because Yu Yu Hakusho outshines the old Funimation dub of Dragon Ball Z, and, like, you know, that's probably what ultimately got them on the map in terms of, you know, voice acting. And it's probably what got more people into anime, because Dragon Ball just introduced it to us, while Yu Yu Hakusho was like, holy crap, there's other stuff like Dragon Ball Z? And, you know, that's how we got into anime. That's kind of how I got introduced to anime in general. I think that Neo GameSpot guy mentioned that, so I'm sure he agrees with me. In terms of the story, you know, it's pretty good. There are a few things I don't really like, mainly coming from the Dark Tournament. For one thing, I don't really like the rule sets, really just because of you know, the whole thing, like, if you're out of the ring, you have 10 seconds to get back in. I feel like that defeats the whole purpose of even having, you know, an outside ring boundaries anyway. You know, why not just have a big thing, you know, as a ring? I feel like that's kind of dumb. Another thing I don't like, which is kind of weird coming from me, is I hate how Hiei in the Dark Tournament is, like, seems so overpowering compared to everyone, even to Yusuke. Like, and Kurama, like, Kuwabara is obviously probably the weakest one out of them all, especially when in this whole thing he's not even as powerful because of his whole unawakened powers or whatever. But I feel like, you know, every time there's like a big problem, and, you know, Yusuke is kind of gone for like half of it. First he's like asleep, then he wakes up to fight, you know, Chu or whatever, and they do that little knife thing. and he gets beaten up pretty badly. Of course, he's fighting like their leader, so. Then the whole Jin thing came around. By Jin, I mean, you know, the Team Masho or whatever. Or no, before the Doctor one. That one was pretty interesting. They were like, we don't want to kill people, so we're just going to let them, and you know, whatever. I don't really remember what was going on. But like every time, like they keep getting beat up. Like Kuwabara's always like the first to go in terms of, or not really the first. Like he really only wins like one fight in my opinion, or like 2 or 3. I mean, he wins props for beating Elder Toguro, but in a way, which I'll get to him in a minute. But he didn't win that many fights. I think even the clown guy beat him, which was kind of sad. What else? Oh yeah, going back to Hiei, it seemed like, you know, then Kurama would come around and it's like, I will defeat you. And he did a pretty decent job. I felt like he was closer to Hiei than anyone else besides Yusuke. And of course, Yusuke was hiding back his powers, which I'll get to in a minute. But, you know, even for Kurama, you know, it seemed like, you know, I thought Kurama was stronger than this. I mean, yeah, he doesn't really show off that much of his moves in the beginning, but, like, I don't really get why he's having so much trouble with, you know, these people. It's like, dude, you're a fucking demon and you're super powerful. Why aren't you doing well? And, like, Hiei comes in. He gets beaten a little bit, but he always comes straight back. He always beats up, you know, the bad guys or whatever. He always wins, like, every fight that he's been in. He struggled a little bit and whatnot. Another thing I didn't like about he is that his arm thing. I thought that, at the time, I thought that was so dumb. Of course, now I didn't care, but at the time, I thought that was stupid. That, you know, he couldn't use his arm. And it felt like that, you know, he can't use his arm, period, anymore. And I feel like, you know, why do you do that? He's almost useless at this point. I did like how his arm got kind of healed and he absorbed the Dragon of the Darkness Flame, so that kind of became his thing. But, you know. And then, of course, Yusuke, being all super badass, he does okay. I mean, he's the main character, so he kind of has to fight, or win his fights, but he always wins by like a hair. And then finally, Spirit Cuffs! Uh-oh, I'm super powerful. Yeah, but you guys didn't know that, you know. You know, that's okay, but I mean, it made me feel a little more satisfied. It's like, okay, Yusuke might actually beat Toguro. But, you know, that was one of my gripes with the thing. Another thing I had sort of with the whole thing is, like, I felt like, you know, the whole reasoning, well, I'll get to that later. That's sort of going on to another point. Oh yeah, I forgot about the Elder Toguro. He's like invincible. What is the point of that? I find that so dumb. You know, that is retarded. That is so fucking retarded. It's like, you know what? You know what I'm gonna do? If I were like had like the power to, if I was like in Yu Yu Hakusho and I had the power, you know what I would do? I would just stab him repeatedly in like every inch of his body to where he would be nothing but spikes. And I would just make it to where, like, I would just keep doing that. I don't even care if that would be like my dude. I would make sure the guy was completely dead. I'd even summon spikes up like under him to like just kill him and like just break him to pieces and like obliterate him. Which is probably the only way to kill him. But of course he dies in a different way. Or he doesn't even die. Anyway. That was sort of my only problems with the Dark Term, or really with the story in general, without giving away too much. Moving on to Shinsui, you know, I did like how they brought back, you know, the old Spirit Detective. It was sort of doing some interesting stuff. And I liked how they sort of gave reasoning for Genkai's pacifier, Koenma's, who I also think is voiced pretty well. I'm glad they sort of did that, because he finally took it out and he could finally fucking talk without, you know, saying. And I like his, you know, teenager form better. I feel like he looks more like, you know, a teenager, or like, I feel like he looks like an actual emperor as opposed to just being a little duty head. I know he's like really old, but still. And Botan's hot too. You know, all the girls, the main girls are hot. Like, you know, they're nice. and all that good junk. Botan's nice. Who's actually voiced by Cynthia Kranz, who's Chi-Chi. And she does a great job, too. And then, Shizuru, who is Kuwabara's sister, does a good job. I'm sort of getting off on a little tangent. But at least I'm being consistent. At least I'm talking about, this thing nonstop. Anyway, the whole Sensui thing. That had the biggest letdown of a fight in the entire thing. Which kind of brings up a point about the series being repetitive, which I think is a criticism of the whole thing. Which is true, Only true for 2 story arcs, though. It's sort of like sandwiched in between, like, for the whole Toguro thing, they do the whole thing. Toguro, the whole big thing with him is that he wanted to die. He wanted someone to kill him because he was stressed or something. And it was so dumb, too. He's like, how can I piss Yusuke off? I'm going to kill his friend! And he supposedly kills Toguro by, he kills himself. Toguro apparently supposedly kills Kuwabara by stabbing him, but not even in his vials. It pisses Yusuke off. He gets so pissed, and he shoots like a super spirit gun at him, and Toguro blocks at it, but he's really weak, and then he dies. It's like, I wanted to die, meh, 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 meh. And then Kuwabara's wakes up, and all that junk. And the whole rando thing kind of did that too, sort of. It didn't piss off. Yusuke kind of kept his cool a bit. And, Kuwabara just gave him, spiritual, help. That was pretty much it. But, not really much else to that. That wasn't nearly as bad. And Rando's actually probably my favorite villain, but where was I? Oh yeah. Then the Sensui thing came back, and Genkai's came back to life too, which I'm actually glad. We get to the Sensui fight, and it's like, it was so dumb, I really think Yusuke could have won that fight. Even though I sort of criticize Yusuke a little bit because he's not much of a fighter. He's a street fighter. He's like you or me, He would fight, without having any experience, and he only got training. He got spiritual training. He has no martial arts experience. He only got spiritual pressure training. Spiritual energy training. That's all he had. He's almost like if Goku just trained to do stuff with his chi or ki or whatever, so he could do super Kamehameha, but he had no other physical strength. He's almost like that. Where Yusuke, he comes up with some pretty interesting stuff. He uses his shirt and gets it wet in order to tie up, what's his face? Shinsui. Other than that, other than that, at one moment and some other moments, he's really not much of a fighter. I'll say this much, in terms of actual fighting ability, he shouldn't have won any fight against a demon that he was in. But in terms of the story, he should have won the fight with Sensui because, he was spiritually that powerful. He beat Toguro, which at the time was a big deal. He should have been able to defeat Sensui. I mean, it's not that hard to defeat someone like him, I guess. I don't know. But instead, he sees the potential of his friends. He's like, you know what? I'm gonna let myself get killed to unleash their full potential and piss them off. So he gives up mid-fight and just is like, Shinsui's beating the shit out of me. And then, of course, we learned how Kuwabara, he was only picking fights with Yusuke because he wanted to be his friends, and he didn't know how to say, hey, be my friend, despite that, that's apparently so hard. Which is bullshit. And we learned that about him. And of course, at this point, they've become friends anyway. Which is something I kind of liked.